My wife slid divorce papers across the kitchen table, like she was presenting me with a bill, fully expecting me to either beg or start throwing things. I did neither. I pulled my reading glasses out of my shirt pocket, sat down and read every single page. All 19 of them. She stood in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, probably rehearsing whatever she planned to say once I started crying. I'm a structural engineer. I don't sign anything I haven't read. When I got to the last page, I picked up the pen she'd left beside the folder, thoughtfully placed, like a good hostess, and signed wherever the yellow arrows told me to. Then I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "You'll want to file before the end of the month," I said. "New court processing fees kick in on the 1st. She didn't say a word, just stared at me like I'd answered her question in a language she didn't know existed. I picked up my coffee and went back to the garage. I had a design review to finish before noon. My name doesn't matter here. What matters is that I'm 53 years old. I've spent 27 years making sure things don't collapse under pressure. Bridges, overpasses, the bones of buildings where people sleep and work and raise their kids. And I know a stress fracture when I see one. My wife and I had been married for 24 years. We built a house together in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville, the kind of street where people leave food on your porch when someone gets sick. From the outside, we looked exactly like what we were supposed to look like. I'd started seeing the cracks about 8 months before that morning. I'm trained not to ignore structural damage. It started the way I assume these things always start, with small inconsistencies that don't mean much on their own, but start to accumulate if you're paying attention. My wife had been a real estate agent for 15 years. Unpredictable schedule, evening showings, weekend open houses, last-minute client calls. I never questioned any of it because I never had a reason to. Until February, when I was troubleshooting a door sensor and scrolled back further through the home access log than I normally would. The house has a smart system I installed 6 years ago. Nothing elaborate, just door sensors, a video doorbell, a few entry cameras, thermostat. I manage everything through an app. What I found in that log didn't fit. On 3 separate Tuesdays. In January, the front door had been unlocked from the inside between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Hours during which my wife had texted me she was across town at property showings. The doorbell camera had been manually switched to privacy mode during those same windows. You can only do that from inside the house, from the app, when you're connected to the home network. I didn't say a word. I just started paying closer attention. We'd shared a family calendar for years, synced across both phones. My wife kept a category called Client Apps in blue. I cross-referenced her entries against her brokerage's public MLS activity over 4 months. An engineer who doesn't verify his load data doesn't stay employed. The listings didn't match. She had blue-coded appointments on 9 different days when no active showings were recorded anywhere in the system. The last piece was a charge in March on our joint card. A hotel 20 minutes from the house, mid-afternoon check-in, 2-hour stay. I recognized the name of the place. We'd stayed there once ourselves, years ago, when we were younger and couldn't afford anything nicer. I sat with that fact for a long time before deciding what to do with it. What I decided was nothing immediate. The moment you confront someone who isn't ready to confess, you hand them the script. They become the victim of your accusation. I'd watched friends go through that, seen how fast the story pivots. I wasn't interested in that dynamic. So on a Thursday afternoon, I drove to see a family law attorney instead. 2 hours, a clear picture of my situation, and a concrete plan. I moved 2 investment accounts on her advice. Entirely disclosed to my own counsel, entirely above board. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The papers were professional and thorough. Clearly not something put together in a week. The asset division was laid out to look almost fair, though it conveniently omitted accounts I'd already addressed. That morning in the kitchen, I signed what needed signing. What I'd already protected stayed protected. After I went back to the garage, I heard my wife moving through the house for about an hour. Cabinets closing, water running, her voice low. On a phone call I couldn't make out. Then the front door. Then her car backing out of the driveway. I sat at my drafting table and noticed that the tightness I'd been carrying in my shoulders for 8 months had simply gone. 3 days later, Ted called. Ted and I had been friends since college. He coached youth baseball on weekends, sold commercial insurance during the week, and, without ever appearing to pay attention, always knew exactly what was happening within a 5-mile radius. His wife and my wife had been close for years, or had been until recently, when the friendship had quietly cooled in ways I'd filed away without examining. "I don't want to get in the middle of this," Ted said, which meant he was already in the middle of it. But Brenda ran into Rochelle and a couple of her friends at dinner last night. Some of what she was saying, I thought you'd want to know. My wife had apparently spent the evening reconstructing history with considerable enthusiasm. In her version, I had been emotionally absent from the marriage for years, distant, consumed by work, fundamentally incapable of connecting. When she'd finally reached her limit and asked for the divorce, my agreeable, no-drama response was proof. She said that I'd never cared about us in the first place. A man who loved his wife would have fought. Did Brenda believe it? I asked. Brenda's known you for 20 years, Ted said. So no. But the other 2 women at the table didn't know you, and they were very moved. I thanked him, and that was the end of that. Rochelle needed a story that made sense to the people around her, so she'd built one. I wasn't going to chase it down and argue with it. The people who knew me didn't need convincing, and the people who didn't know me weren't my concern. Moving out of a house you've lived in for 18 years is a particular kind of archaeology. You discover things you forgot you owned. You make decisions about what mattered and what you'd simply been carrying out of habit. I gave myself 3 weeks and approached it the way I approach any deconstruction project, methodically, room by room, with a clear list of what was mine, what wasn't, and what I was genuinely uncertain about. My tools went first. A career's worth of equipment lived in that garage, and I wasn't leaving so much as a measuring tape behind. My drafting table, my grandfather's level, a beautiful old brass barrel instrument that still read true after 60 years of use. The framed blueprint of the first bridge I ever led as engineer of record, which had hung above my desk for 15 years. My books, 2 full walls of them, my record collection, and the turntable to play it on, which my wife had tolerated for 2 decades, with the patient resignation of someone waiting for a phase to pass. I left the furniture, the kitchen things, the garden tools she used every spring. I wasn't interested in cataloging grievances or fighting over a stand mixer. Clean breaks heal faster than messy ones. I'd learned that somewhere along the way and tried to hold on to it. My daughter helped me move without asking too many questions. She's 24, works in graphic design, rents a place about 6 miles from the house she grew up in. She showed up on a Saturday with her truck and her boyfriend, and just worked steadily alongside me all day. When the truck was empty and her boyfriend went to get food, she sat on a moving box in the middle of my new apartment and looked at me carefully. "Are you actually okay?" she said. "Not just telling me you are." "Better than I've been in months," I said. "I mean that." She nodded, slowly. "I know you do," she said, and there was something in how she said it that I held on to without pressing. My apartment is on the 8th floor of a building in Brentwood, 10 minutes from the office. I set up my drafting table in the 2nd bedroom, with proper lighting and a clean sightline to the window. I found a used leather sofa that felt like the right proportions for the space. I keep the kitchen stocked with things I actually eat and go to bed when I'm tired, instead of when someone else's schedule requires it. The first week alone was quieter than I expected. Not an uncomfortable quiet, but the right kind. The kind that lets you think without interference. My wife started reaching out about 2 weeks after I'd settled in. Was practical. First round was practical. She couldn't locate the insurance documents for the water heater, wanted to know if I'd taken the spare key to the garden gate. I answered each text, briefly and factually. The insurance documents were in the fireproof box, in the hall closet, 3rd shelf, inside the blue accordion folder. No, I hadn't taken the garden key. It was hanging on the row of hooks inside the garage door, where it had been for 8 years. Then the reach-outs shifted. A text one evening. "I've been thinking about things. Do you think we could talk sometime?" A voicemail a few days later that circled and circled without landing anywhere, ending with something about how she felt We'd never really discussed what had happened between us. I called her back once. You had a lawyer draw up 19 pages of paperwork before you said a word to me, I said. That's how much discussion you were interested in. A pause. I know how that looks. I was going through something I didn't know how to talk to you about. You could have talked to me instead of someone else. Entirely, I said. But that's done now. Was there something you actually needed? She hung up. I went back to reviewing drawings for a pedestrian overpass in Murfreesboro. My daughter called on a Wednesday evening about a month after I'd moved. I could tell from her first word that she'd been working her way toward this conversation for a while. Dad, I have to tell you something, and I'm sorry it took me so long. She steadied herself. I knew something was off for months. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see last winter. Some messages on Mom's phone when she left it on the counter, and I was standing right there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be the one to bring it to you in case I was wrong. And then I was afraid to say anything in case I was right. Her voice broke a little. I'm sorry. I should have said something. You were trying to protect both of us at once, I said. That's too much weight for one person. You don't owe me an apology for that. We talked for over an hour about what she'd observed over the years, things she'd noticed and quietly filed away, the particular loneliness of watching a family from the inside and not being able to say what you see. At the end, she said, "Can I come over this weekend? I want to see where you live." "Saturday," I said. "I'll make dinner." She came in the late afternoon, handed me a bottle of wine and a small succulent in a terracotta pot. "For the new place," she said. I set it on the kitchen windowsill where the evening light would reach it. She walked through the apartment slowly, taking her time the way you do when you're really trying to assess whether someone is okay, and not just performing it. "It feels like you in here," she said, standing at the window, looking out at the city. I mean that as a good thing. We made pasta, the meal I've made since she was a kid, whenever we had time and nowhere to be. She told me about a logo project she was working on for a local food company. I walked her through the overpass design, showing her why a particular span configuration was more elegant than the first draft. It was easy in a way things hadn't been for a long time. We were finishing the dishes when the front desk called up. The security guard said there was a woman in the lobby asking for me. Said she was my wife. I looked at my daughter, who was drying a bowl with focused attention. "She's downstairs," I said. My daughter set the bowl on the counter. "Do you want me to go?" "No," I said. "Stay right where you are." My wife stepped into the apartment and stopped when she saw my daughter standing in the kitchen. Whatever she'd planned to say reset itself. She was slightly damp from the rain outside, and the expression she was wearing, the composed one she uses when she's trying to manage a situation, wasn't quite holding together. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. My daughter looked at her mother evenly. "Hi, Mom." I was nearby, I thought. My wife stopped. Tried again. "I just hoped your father and I might be able to talk." "You can talk," my daughter said, and turned back to the dish rack. My wife sat down across from me without being invited, the way you do when you've been in a place long enough to stop noticing you're doing it. She looked around the apartment slowly. The drafting table in the other room, the record player in the corner, the blueprint on the wall, the small plant on the windowsill that hadn't been there 3 hours ago. "You seem settled," she said. "I am." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than it had been at the door. "I made a mistake. What happened? It's been over for months. It was never what I told myself it was. I got confused, and I dealt with it badly, and I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "You knew about him." "For about 8 months. She went pale. "And you said nothing." "What would I have said?" "What would I have said?" "You'd already decided. Confronting you wouldn't have changed your decisions. It would only have changed who got to control the story." She looked at me for a long time. "I thought you signed those papers without fighting because you didn't care." I told myself that's what it meant, that the marriage had never mattered to you. "It mattered to me for 24 years, I said. "Right up until it stopped mattering to you." "That's not." She stopped, started again differently. What if I don't want this to be how it ends? I looked at her and felt very little except distance. Not anger, just the particular clarity that comes when you've already done all the grieving there is to do. Rochelle, I said, I genuinely wish you well. I mean that without any sharpness behind it. But there's nothing to go back to. That door is closed. She looked past me, to my daughter then, maybe hoping for a different kind of traction from that direction. My daughter met her mother's eyes without blinking. He's happy, Mom, she said quietly. Actually happy. I think you should let that be. My wife stood. She looked around the apartment one more time, as if she were committing something to memory. Then she pulled her coat close, said goodnight to both of us, and walked out. My daughter and I stood in the kitchen after the door shut. Then she reached up and got 2 glasses from the cabinet. Wine, she said. Please, I said. We sat together on the sofa, and she poured, and we looked out at the city in the rain. From 8 floors up, the wet streets below had that particular shine. Everything reflected, everything more vivid than it appears in daylight. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment, the way she used to when she was small and watching television, before life filled up with the kind of distance that makes simple contact harder to reach. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I said. I really am. Good. She didn't move, because I needed you to be. I looked out at the buildings, the overpasses, the infrastructure of a city holding itself up through rain and dark and weight it never stops carrying. There's something honest about that kind of work. You do it right. Nothing falls. No revising the results later to make them mean something they don't. I'd been building what I was supposed to build for a long time. Now I was building something else. Smaller, quieter. Mine in a way the other thing never quite had been. And tonight, at least, I wasn't building it alone.